Welcome back to the Social Impact Level Up podcast. This is where we blur the lines between business, nonprofit, and impact. I'm your host, Wendy V, and I'm a social impact strategist here to help you build a successful and sustainable legacy of social change. In this week's episode, we're going to hear from a social entrepreneur who has been on a journey to change the world just like you. If you are interested in social entrepreneurship, this is the place for you. Let's jump right into this week's episode. Hey everyone, it's me, Wendy, and we are here in the Social Impact Level Up podcast with my friend Rachel. And Rachel and I met at the FinCon convention this year, and I'm so excited that she's agreed to come and talk to us more about what it means to be financially independent and to retire early and what her story is with that journey. And along the way, she'll probably give us some gems about financial freedom and all kinds of other things that she believes in that I'm super excited to learn about. And so that's one of the reasons why she is here with us. And she's also helping people with their financial education, their journey. And so she'll tell us a little more about what services she provides and how she helps people and how you can connect to her as well. So I'm excited, Rachel, to welcome you because I haven't seen you in a few months, but I know last time I was sitting with you across the dinner table. Now you are across the pond in England. So tell us a little more about yourself and your journey and how you're making an impact.
Yeah. So it's so good to see you. I think last time we had dinner at that ridiculous, what's that place called?
Planet Hollywood.
Planet Hollywood. It was such a hoot. I hadn't eaten at Planet Hollywood in forever.
I can't remember the last time I've been at one of those.
Yeah. It was a hoot. Okay. But anyway, so my background is actually in corporate fashion. So I had a regular old corporate job. Fashion, I guess, is a little insane. So it was like, I was constantly working these like 60 and 70 hours weeks and traveling all the time. And I just didn't really feel like I had control over my life. Right. Maybe you felt that way too.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So and around when I was in my 20s, I was always just sort of using my 401k and really I like to tell people haphazardly investing in my Roth IRA. And when I was in my late 20s, I got diagnosed with a condition called rheumatoid arthritis. And I was super burnt out with work and under a lot of pressure and a lot of stress. And I had this epiphany that I couldn't make this work for the rest of my life. There was no way that in 20 years I was still going to be dragging myself into the office to look at samples and work in fashion. So as much as I actually liked fashion and some things about fashion, it's a very tough industry. And so I was doing a lot of research about what other people do to get out of the 9-to-5 grind. And, a lot of them are just some other version of what I considered to be a grind, right? Like starting your own business and, there are other things, real estate, which can work really well, but isn't as passive as maybe you might think. So, so I discovered this movement called FIRE, Financial Independence, Retire or Relax Early. And the concept is to get to a place where you can stop trading your time for money. So where you basically are living off of your investments, whether they're in real estate or the stock market, so that you can be free and have ownership over your time. That's really what it's about, is owning your time.
I love that. And you went full force into this out of fashion, out of some horrific incidents in fashion, and were able to actually navigate that and get yourself out, right? And so now you work, when you do have clients and you do things, but you also have a whole bunch of freedom.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, I focused on increasing my income in my working job. So I didn't have time to have a side hustle. Some people do, and they get a lot of nourishment and joy out of side hustles. But for me, I didn't have time for anything really other than working. And so for me, it became a real focus on how can I earn more money in the hours that I'm already working. And that looked like changing jobs, asking for promotions, really just flat out asking for raises, things of that nature, so that I could increase my income without increasing my working hours. And that worked for me. I was able to keep my cost of living really low. So I didn't move. I got a roommate. I did all kinds of things that I needed to do to get my cost of living down so that I could take all of this extra money that I was now earning and invest it in the stock market in really simple index funds. And I got to a place where I felt comfortable walking away from my corporate job. So I'm what's considered lean FIRE. So that means I have enough money that I can make it work, but not a lot for extras. And so because I want to get to what's called fat fire, which is like being completely able to live off of my assets, I do still work, but I've pivoted and started a business where I help people learn about financial independence, learn how to manage their cash flow, and learn how to invest. Because I think it's a huge, huge hole in our educational system because money is a tool that we're all using, but we don't get taught how to manage it at all when we're in school.
Yeah, it's almost like you're taught to be afraid of it rather than to use it to empower you to make life choices.
Yeah, and it's much better if you just embrace it than it is to turn a blind eye and say, "Oh gosh, like I don't know what I'm supposed to do here. I better just not do anything and hope for the best." And like that doesn't usually work in any scenario. So, and it certainly doesn't work with money.
Yeah, and it's like, we spend so much time feeling like we're beholden to money or that we have to have this exchange of time for and energy for this money that we're saying, comes from our employer. And we feel very, like I said, beholden to that model. And what you're describing is almost like a completely different paradigm shift for people because you're able to still make an impact in people's lives and help people, but you're also able to actively decide when you do that, how you do that, and what it looks like for you and your lifestyle.
Absolutely. And the other thing that you just touched on that I think is so important is that when we work for somebody else, 99% of people look at it as what am I giving to this company? And then what am I getting in exchange, like for money wise?
Yeah.
But for me, what I was able to do is really flip that paradigm and say, what am I getting out of this job? How is this job serving me? And how can I take what I'm getting from this job and make it work for me in the best way possible? So, how can I learn? How can I grow? And how can I increase my income? Versus just saying, like, this is my role in life, this is what I have, and I should be grateful for it, you know?
Yeah. And I'm stuck in this role because it's what keeps me able to pay the bills.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, being able to pay the bills is really important, but a lot of people feel that the role that they have is where they should be in life. And I just want to scream from the top of a building, like, think bigger. Think bigger about what you can do and who you are, and think bigger about yourself. Because
Yeah.
you are holding yourself back in a lot of ways by not applying for that job you feel slightly unqualified for, or not, asking your boss for a raise, even though you've been an awesome employee for the last 5 years.
Absolutely. And it always reminds me of, when you say those things, our journey is so parallel, which is why I think when we finally met and sat down to dinner, we were like, hey, you have a very interesting take on the same journey. We should talk about this. And we were like, let's hop on the podcast and talk about it. It's the same exact way I felt when I was in my role as a federal employee. And it wasn't like I was in corporate or in any particular, I was in like a certain sector that is defined by rules and regulations and, things that are very rigid. And so being able to explore entrepreneurship also allows me to explore like my creativity. And one of the things I love about your content in particular is you're so creative and you're like, and I think it might be like this fashion brain, this creative brain that you already had anyway comes through in your content. So you're helping to, explore people's personal finances in a way that brings them joy at the same time, or brings them humor, or brings them information, kind of strikes their interest in a new topic, which I think is great. Do you want to talk a little bit more about like how do you do what you do?
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you for saying those kind things about my content. I do work really hard on it, and it's definitely a learning curve. Like they're not all wins.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes,
other
we all have not all wins.
Yeah, it's content, But yeah, so basically one of the first things that you need to do one of the things, and I don't know if I'm allowed to swear, but one of the things I say all the
Yeah.
time is you kind of need to get your financial shit together. Like I think one of the things a lot of people think of is, oh, you're so adult, you have your financial shit together. Well, if you don't look at your money and you don't sit down and you don't write it all down and say, this is where every penny is going, then you can't decide if you're being intentional with your money. And I think one of the things that you talk about a lot with impact is you have resources and how are you going to choose to use them, right? What is
Yeah.
your impact on the world going to be? Well, it's the same with money. You get to choose how you use your money and you can be intentional with your money. So choosing the things that matter to you is incredibly important. There's no such thing as a frivolous purchase. It's just whether that purchase is getting you closer to your goals or not. And your goals might be things like spending more time with my family, enjoying the great outdoors, volunteering. Maybe it costs you a bunch of money to drive to a volunteering event that you want to do, and it takes up an entire Saturday that you could have spent doing something else, but it's getting you closer to that goal of being a person who gives. And you're spending money in line with your values. And that's what's more important than just being a miserable penny pinching miser,
Yeah.
right? Like that's not the goal. The goal is to enjoy yourself along the way. And if it takes you longer to get to early retirement or financial independence, where you have to work a bit more or change jobs or ask for a raise or all of those things I love to talk about, um, it's okay, because the purpose is to figure out what your goals are and how you are going to get to those goals. And they can change, but you need to have a starting point for your goals.
Yeah, and you're inviting people to think bigger. I say that a lot too. It's like the goal is you might be limiting yourself with the goal because this is all you can see for yourself right now. But if there was something more that you hadn't even explored in your imagination and given yourself the freedom to imagine, how can you say, oh, well, I want a house that has an infinity pool? Like, you'll
Yeah.
continue to say, no, I want to stay in this small role. And all I'm allowed to have is a house that has zero backyard.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it is a mindset thing. And so that's one of the other parallels I know between the messaging that we have is like, how can you invite yourself into this world where there's other options for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think mindset is so important. And one of the things, so I'm obsessed with Atomic Habits by James Clear. It's such a good book. But one of the things that he talks about a lot is that you need evidence to show yourself that you are a different person than you perceive yourself to be.
Mhm.
So the example that he uses is he talks about two people who are trying to quit smoking. One person says, when offered a cigarette, says, "No, thanks, I'm trying to quit." The other person says, "No, thanks, I'm not a smoker." Right?
Mm.
Even if they both each had a cigarette 2 minutes ago, it's about the framework of how you see yourself. So if you see yourself as a person who is able to live abundantly and able to grow and think bigger about your own life, you need some evidence of that, right? And some of the evidence when it comes to, if you're starting out really, really basic with money and you've never really thought about money and you don't really have much savings, it can be simple things like opening a high yield savings account and auto transferring $20 a month into it. But you need some evidence that you're capable of taking action and that you have a path and you're going to stick to it. And it just turns into this sense of A, I am consistent, and B, I am changing who I am. And those are the two things that you really need in order to grow, I think, whether it's from a financial standpoint or from another
Just a
standpoint, more of an
personal
impact.
standpoint. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, and it's true. And I think that it also points to that there are people who have a growth mindset that are looking to grow, that's their goal, and others who are more comfortable without the growth. And that's completely okay. There's nothing kind of judging against that. But it also it just keeps you stagnant. And so you can't expect the growth. Like you can expect the results. Like I'm going to be able to retire early as a millionaire, but not do any of the legwork. And so all of the things that you were describing, the micro steps of how do you even ask for a raise, people are really intimidated by some of those steps. And so can you talk a little bit more about like any of the stories from your work about how you've gotten people to get past some of these, really intimidating financial steps?
Yeah, definitely. So I have many clients who have taken the leap and gotten significantly higher paying jobs. Like that is the first thing that we work on, or they're
Mhm.
coming in and they're already in a salary negotiation. And it can be something really simple. Like, for example, you can, let's say that you are currently earning $65,000 a year in your job and you've been in that job for 5 years. I have a client, this is exactly the case. She's been in the job for 5 years, killing it. Human resources would call her about other positions within the company, and she just lacked the confidence to apply for those positions. So
Mm.
she started applying for some of these higher level positions, and she called me and she said, "I have an interview. I'm thinking about asking for $70,000." And I was like, "Hold the phone. You haven't gotten a raise in 5 years. Inflation is 8%. We can look up the pay bands because they're public records. So we can just Google what other people in that title are earning." And I encouraged her to ask for $90,000, which for her was just like a mind bending experience. Now, she didn't get $90,000, but she did get a huge pay increase, much, much, much more than she could have ever imagined. And it's because she just had the courage to ask. And it's not about saying, "Could I please have this raise?" or "Could you please pay me this?" It's, "Here's all the amazing things that I am going to provide for this organization based on my history of X, Y, and Z. This is why I should be this is why I'm going to need to get closer to X, Y, and Z salary. So it's also about knowing some of the lingo and knowing some of the verbiage
Yeah.
around of what you're asking for. You're not asking for a raise. You're delivering way more than, they're offering. It's not like when a pizza shows up, you can just say, oh, I actually just want to pay you $10. No, the pizza shows up, it's all mashed up and it looks awful. Then you can say, I'd really like a discount based on X, Y, and Z things. Right.
Yeah.
So
And it's like people wouldn't even think to sometimes look for similar information about the job that they're going into. But that's kind of just part of, doing your research and knowing your field. If you are crossing a threshold from, one level of duty to another level of duty, ideally you would be moving into an whole entire pay band difference. And I think people don't think about it that way. And I know in the federal government, those pay bands are public and they're very rigid. As I was saying, everything there is very prescriptive. And you knew that if you were moving from even a non-supervisory to a supervisory role, that there was going to be like a $10,000 increase at least because of the fact that there was this added sense of, supervising people or whatever usually. So it just depends. But people who don't look into that kind of stuff, I always wonder, I'm like, then, they get such a good deal. But then sometimes, even if you do look into it and you advocate for yourself, which has happened to me before, when I did go back and say, hey, there was a discrepancy here. Really, I make this and you should be looking at this amount for my comparable pay. I realized that, they still lowballed me later. And I was really upset when I found out that other directors were paid a lot more than I was, and there was probably some sort of, like, male, female thing going on there as well, and so it's kind of like, yes, you advocate for yourself, and even then, you still may not see, the result you're really looking for.
yeah, and it's like heartbreaking when you realize, especially if it's a new job, you realize that you undersold yourself and that other people with
Yes.
the same title are earning more. And it kind of, you can certainly go back to them and say, "Hi, I found out that so and so, who has exactly the same number of years of experience as me, is earning this amount. Can you help me understand the discrepancy in our pay?" Help
Mhm.
ask them to defend themselves, right? And I think that's another thing about employment that's so tricky is there's so little transparency in
Mhm.
employment information and people don't like to talk about their salaries.
Yeah.
But I also think that because of that, I'm always encouraging people to aim really high. Go in and ask for a number that just makes your armpits sweat. Don't go in and say, "Oh, I'd like $5,000 more than you asked me for." Like, no, go in with a number that gives you anxiety
Mhm.
because that tells them that you're really valuable. Also, as a person who has worked in a corporate role and who's hired people in the past, I'm never hiring someone that I feel I could easily just replace with someone else. I'm always so excited to find a person I actually want to hire that I'm going to go the extra mile to get this person on my team. And if I have to come up with extra budget to do it, I'm going to probably go ahead and do that because that this person has the values that I need to fill this role. So I think
Yeah. That
as the
for sure.
job seeker, we feel that when you're the job seeker, you feel like, oh my God, I really want this job. I'm so desperate for this job. But guess what? The employer is also really desperate to hire you, but you don't see that because you're not on that side.
Mhm.
So remembering that it's a much more balanced playing field than you think.
I've been that middle manager too, where you're going back and forth to HR, like, no, I really need more money for this person. Like, I really need this one person. And I mean, someone's waited on me like 4 months to get back to them for a role like that because of that very reason of like trying to get them the salary they wanted to say yes, because you want that one person. And you're like, please, yes, just don't take another job while we're trying to get this done. So
Yeah.
I've been exactly in that role too. So I want to go back to something we were talking about earlier, where we were talking about people's, how do you step out into your vision or how do you kind of get into a place where they can do what you did, which is what I call removing the golden handcuffs, taking, the job security away from yourself and stepping out into a role that's completely defined by you and your own success that you're able to foster for yourself. And you've been pretty successful. As you said, you're able to maintain a fun, jovial, juviant traveling lifestyle that I enjoy watching on Instagram. And so how do people go through that process of taking off the golden handcuffs? Like, what advice would you give?
So for me, the thing that made me comfortable and willing to do it was I had 3 years worth of living expenses saved up in cash before I quit. So I had enough assets that I knew I would be able to make it work in a much less expensive country. So you mentioned that I'm in the UK right now. We've signed a lease. We're moving to Portugal, actually.
Oh,
The cost of living, yeah, the cost of living in both of these countries is dramatically lower than the cost of living was for me in New York City.
mhm.
So the quality of life that I'm able to have by not living in I loved living in New York. It was amazing, but it was like eating me alive financially. And so I saved up 3 years worth of living expenses. I also am very fortunate to have a partner who he does not financially support me, but he emotionally supports me. So I had
Mm,
someone cheering for me in the background saying, look at these numbers, look at these spreadsheets. We have run these numbers so many times, 18 ways to Sunday. You know, you're miserable and your life is worth something. And there's no reason that you have to stay in this. The golden handcuffs for me were also my apartment. I had a very, very inexpensive apartment in New York City, but it had
yeah.
roaches. It had a crazy landlord. It had no dishwasher, no washer dryer. I mean, it was just like it was a mess. I needed to move out. I was 36 years old. I had a roommate. It was just time for me to, stop making those sacrifices. And so between the cash, between all of the planning and the spreadsheet and having someone who I knew was rooting for me, it made the transition a lot easier. And I didn't actually initially think that I was going to do this money coaching that I do now. I took a really long break. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And when I sort of came across money coaching as a business, I realized, wait a minute, I've been in the shoes of a lot of other, for me, it's single women in their 30s who are working their tail off corporate. I didn't have a partner while I was building all this wealth. I thought I was building wealth for myself to support if I wanted to have a kid by myself, if I wanted to buy a house by
Mm,
myself, to take care of my ailing health in old age. I thought I was basically just preparing myself for a life of being solo. And
yeah. It sounds like it. You're like spinster with the wealth.
that's basically what I thought was happening. I was like, well, I think it's time to write this off. Like I'm not going to find my person, which is not how it all played out at all. But
There's
I
hope
do think
still.
there's hope. Well, I mean, I was so surprised when I met my partner. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, this is what it's like to have a supportive partner. What a refreshing experience. Um, but yeah, so for me, it ended up being fueled by a lot of fear around my personal life, around my health, around being single. And I think that when you are fending for yourself and you don't have anyone else bringing in income, it builds this really intense sense of fear. And then you keep the golden handcuffs because you don't
Mhm.
believe in yourself and you have nobody to fall back on. But if you have 3 years worth of living expenses in cash and you're willing to live somewhere else that's cheap while you focus on building your business, while you think about what else your options are, and while you live a little bit, you live outside the box, that's only going to make you more and more and more comfortable with the decisions that you've made, I think.
Yeah, no, there's so many truths in there that I think it's related to my journey as well that I love all of that. And I know what you're talking about with the sacrifices to live somewhere because I moved back to Maryland to lower my cost of living as well from Houston, which I like loved my apartment. The complete opposite. I didn't have. Well, I did. It was still Houston, so there's no riches, but it was very very nice. And I realized that in that process, exactly what you're saying. It's how do you make these continual decisions to support you on your journey to keep going. And it is nice to hear, that having a supportive partner makes a difference. I'm the same as like, I'm going to be a spinster forever. Me and my dog are going to be riding solo for as long as she's here. So, it is kind of funny to hear you say that. But I think, with what you were talking about taking the golden handcuffs off and having the financial security, a lot of people have trouble saving, or a lot of people have trouble getting to the point where they feel like they have that much money that they could take a leap like that. And I know for a long time in my career, I did. And then eventually I did have enough money to take the leap and felt like I could do it. And it's worked out. I'm still alive. It's a year and a half later. I have not starved to death. But I want to know, like, what do you advise people when they come to you and say, but I don't have the ability to save?
So it could go either one of two ways. Like either you're just not earning enough money for the lifestyle that you're living. And for some folks, that means they're really hand to mouth. They live in a cheap apartment. They don't have a car payment or whatever. They just literally need to earn more money. For other people, it's much more about like kind of what I was talking about earlier. do you actually know where your money is going? Because I
Mhm.
ask people, well, approximately what does your life cost you in a month? And they'll say, oh, three, maybe $4,000. And then they write it all down. They're like, wow, actually last month I spent $7,000. So we
Oh,
don't
wow.
have, and it's super common. It's totally common. Like people have
That's
no
total big
sense.
difference.
Oh, the differences are amazing. And it's not,
Mhm.
this is no one's fault. It's just like you don't have a strong sense of like what you're spending on needs versus wants. And so learning how to have a little bit more of a keener, sharper eye on that is one of the easiest ways to save money is to just stop spending it on other stuff. So,
Mhm.
because raising your income can take some time. You're going to have to ask for a raise. You're going to have to apply for new jobs. You're going to have to do X, Y, and Z. But in the meantime, like, how often are you actually ordering DoorDash? You know?
Yeah. Yeah, when I stopped eating out, I mean, gosh, that made such a big difference in my budget, and making choices like that has allowed me to keep choosing to be an entrepreneur. And so it's not that it only benefits you if you're saving, if you're making this choice and you already gotten used to those kinds of like there I wouldn't even call them sacrifices, just lifestyle choices. Like,
Yeah.
I noticed too that, gosh, I'm not gaining as much weight when I don't eat out, and there's other benefits to this choice than just financial choice that benefit my well-being. So, I love that you said that because it's all kind of ties together with these decisions that you have about how do you spend your time, how do you spend your energy, how do you continue to go forward on your journey with your vision, and how do you continue to, like, live your life. So, the last part of the conversation I wanted to get back to is about retirement and retiring early because you mentioned it could also be relaxing early if you're talking about the fire movement. But what does that look like for people who are in their 30s or 40s who can't even imagine retirement right now and think, they're going to be working until they're 70?
Yeah. Well, so it kind of comes back to again what your goals are. But one of my favorite things to talk about is partial retirement. So, what you can basically do, this is also called coast fire or barista fire. There's a bunch of different versions of it because we're money nerds and we like to get to the nitty gritty. Um, but for example, if you can get enough of a nest egg saved up that it will just grow in the stock market by the time you're 65, that you have enough money to retire comfortably, you can basically cut down how much you're saving. Now, when you cut down how much you're
Mm,
saving, especially if you're like me and you've been saving pretty aggressively, like if you're saving 20, 30, 40% of your income because you're trying to work towards early retirement, when you cut out that 20 or 30 or 40% of your income that you had been saving and investing, all of a sudden you don't need to work nearly as much. So, from an impact standpoint, for example, if you are a person who has been in the corporate world for a really long time and is really passionate about something and would love to work in the public sector or would love to work for a nonprofit, for example. Well, if you have enough of a nest egg saved and invested, you could take a job that pays significantly less because you just don't need to save as much anymore. You've really
mm,
cut into how much of your money needs to go towards preparing for retirement. Now, if you're already in your 40s and you haven't started preparing for retirement yet, um, the time is now, right? Like the growth that you get in the stock market is not from choosing the best stocks or being really savvy, it's from time. So if you're thinking to yourself, oh, I'm going to be working till I'm 90 anyway, what's the point? Well, actually, that's probably not true. And if you got started now, it's not like the day you turn 65, you liquidate all of your assets. This is something that I find myself explaining a lot. You're going to take a little bit of your money out of your honey pot every year, which means that the money that you invest when you're 40 could stay invested for 40 years or 50 years. It could be invested until you're 80 or you're 90.
mhm.
So you'll have that money growing in the stock market in the background to support you in the future. So it does make sense to go ahead and get started right away with preparing for retirement. And even if you could only retire 5 years earlier, the difference in time is amazing. Like, and how amazing would
Yeah.
it be to be able to volunteer for your favorite organization 3 or 4 days a week for 5 years? That would be such an opportunity to give.
Yeah, your quality of life to think about like 5 years more time where you're able to make those kinds of choices to relax versus like continue the hustle. It's just, I think that's worth it. So,
Yes.
yeah, to quickly end, because I know we both have to skedaddle to other things we've got going on today. What if if there is a way to contact you that is best, can you tell our listeners which of the ways they should be reaching out to you if they're interested in learning more about what you do and how to connect with you if they're interested in working with you?
Yeah. So the best way to get in touch with me, I feel very like a millennial saying this, but The best way to get in touch with me is via Instagram direct message. So my Instagram handle and my TikTok handle are Rachel_talks money, TALKSMONEY. You can also email me at rachel@racheltalksmoney.com to get in touch with me. If you try to get in touch with me on TikTok, TikTok is such a hot mess that I might miss you. So please choose Instagram DM or email if you would like to get in touch with me and just talk to me about your own situation. I'm always happy to talk to anyone who reaches out.
Yeah, and it is so millennial that even for me, I'm like, yeah, Instagram DMs are probably the best way to. Honestly, it's one of the things I actually pay attention to. But yeah, TikTok, I don't know what goes on over there. I'm so horrible. If you catch me on TikTok, I'm like watching something as opposed to doing anything for myself. But it was great to have you. I'm so excited. Hopefully we'll get to see each other soon in person. Or I'll get to go and watch ponies on your Instagram stories, which is always
Yes.
exciting.
Yeah, I should get some ponies up there today, actually. I haven't posted ponies in a
Yay!
couple of days. I'll put some ponies up.
I am the captive audience for the wild ponies that are part of Rachel's new life in England. And I'm excited about Portugal too. So new content to consume from you will be exciting to see a whole new part of your segment of your journey.
Yeah,
So thanks for being here and thanks for being part of the podcast and all of the good things. Do you want to say any last words to the audience and then we'll close up our conversation?
Just thank you so much for having me, Wendy. It's been such a pleasure. I'm so excited to be a part of your community. And I want people to know that it is possible to change your financial future. And it's about consistency and small steps. And it's really, really doable. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you feel behind in life, if you just have no clue what you're doing, just start, just take action. That's the only way you're going to be able to make a difference in your own future. So don't wait for someone else to come and save you. Prince Charming is not coming.
Even though in her story, there was one that came eventually.
Eventually, by the time, if I had waited to start until I met him, I
Yeah.
would still be living in that cockroach infested apartment in New York City, and he would still be living in England. And we wouldn't have had the financial resources for me to quit my job to come and be with him.
And to move to Portugal. So you can get your own fairy tale. That's
Yes.
the moral of the story.
The moral of the story is it can happen, although I'm just as surprised as anyone else that it happened to me. So
Right? And you had to have all the followers on Instagram at the same time, I promise. So it's good to see you, Rachel. Thanks for being here and being part of the podcast. We really appreciate it. All right. To all of our listeners, thanks for being here for another episode. This has been the Social Impact Level Up podcast. We're so excited to have you as part of the community as well. And we will see you around the next episode. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Social Impact Level Up podcast. It's been awesome to interview today's guest, and I hope that you leave inspired to take action. If you're looking for any of the information we spoke about, it's probably down in the show notes. Make sure that you're checking them out and you're clicking on any of the links that seem exciting to you. If you are looking for a coach or a consultant to help you with your social impact or your sustainability, reach out to me via my website, hop on my email list, or jump into one of my programs. All of the links are below. So excited to have you as part of the collective. Make sure that you come back and join us for another episode.